After 14 years as a Mac user, I finally switched back to Windows. Well, why? Because of the Dell XPS 15. Was it worth it? Well, let's find out. As a musician, graphic designer and video editor, the MacBook was a no-brainer back in 2006. In my opinion, Windows computers were pure junk back then. With a 2015 MacBook clinging on for dear life after 5 years of ridiculous abuse, it was time for a change. And while I saw countless YouTubers previewing the 2020 Dell XPS 15, it felt like this machine was the one to go for. So is it worth switching to Windows after almost a decade and a half? Well, here are 5 things that I love about the Dell XPS 15. Number 1, it looks phenomenal. Windows laptops finally look good. If you saw my unboxing video, you will have seen just how stunning the packaging was and how sleek the laptop looks. It's dwarfed by my admittedly older 15-inch MacBook Pro, and it feels super premium. This is a great looking laptop. The 16:10 aspect ratio at 4K with a touchscreen, that is unreal. It's so good. Just looking at my old MacBook and this guy together show the gulf between the two. Number 2, the ports. I'm sure you've seen at least a dozen YouTubers talking about this already, but the SD card reader is a game changer. It's the bomb. My MacBook was one of the last pre-dongle phase MacBooks having an SD card reader and even an HDMI port. It was awesome, but those days are well and truly over. Granted, I need a dongle to connect to an HDMI input now, but Dell provides that for free. Do I wish there was still an HDMI port? Well, yeah, of course I do. Can I live with what Dell has given me? Yes, the SD card reader alone makes it worth it for me. 3, it feels great to use and it packs a punch. For me, this is by far the best keyboard I've ever used. It's perfectly weighted and it's well spaced. It feels so good. And as a long-time MacBook user, I'm a huge fan of the Windows key. Have you ever used a Windows key? It just works. The touchpad is huge, and here's where I know many of you will have a bunch of questions. Lots of YouTubers have complained about kind of the wobbliness of the touchpad, and some have even sent theirs back because of it. I was freaking out when I heard that, and I worried whether this would be the right laptop for me, but I have to say, mine has been perfect. It's firm and well responsive. Honestly, as far as touchpads go, while it's not quite Mac level as far as usage, it's about as darn close as you can get in my opinion. And as far as specs go, it's performed phenomenally. It's got an 8-core 10th generation i7 processor, 32 gigabytes of RAM, plus the additional 4 gigabytes graphic card. I don't really understand what that means, I'm a bit of a noob, but that's what my model is. And it's got a 1 terabyte solid state drive and the touchscreen as well, the 4K touchscreen. It's a monster. It's blasted through video editing. It's handled multitasking like a champ, and it's even coped pretty well with a few fairly intense video games like Jedi Fallen Order and things like that on ultra settings. It's so good to be able to play decent games again. Honestly, I can't fault the power on this thing. It's not designed for gaming by any means, but for a very casual gamer like me, it can certainly cope. It's good. Number 4, the screen is phenomenal. I know I've mentioned it twice already, but the screen is just so good. The 16:10 aspect ratio is a bit weird to get used to, but it's so good. And I've heard so many other people say it's hard to imagine anything else after using it. It's just that good. I'm not going to go into specifics because someone else would do such a better job than I would, but just trust me when I say it is great. And 5, it turns out Windows is pretty good now. Don't get me wrong, there are a few things I just can't stand about Windows. And the transition from Mac to Windows after so long is really hard. But I've also been really impressed with Windows 10. It definitely goes toe to toe with Mac OS now. Something that I didn't think I would ever say 5 years ago. That's a big deal. Stay tuned for a much more detailed video discussing the switch from Mac to Windows. In fact, if you've got time, why not subscribe to my channel now so you don't miss it? We're going to talk about that transition from Mac after almost 15 years to Windows. So those were the 5 things that I loved. Here are a few things that I'm not so sure about. Like the speakers, for one. I know everyone is raving about the speakers, but I have to be honest, I just don't really think they're as good as people are saying. Like the enhanced audio is borderline unusable. Admittedly, that's a Windows thing, and they're certainly loud, but I'm not sure I would call them anything but average. Is that really bad for me to say that? That's just my experience. I also had an issue for a few hours where those speakers they went muffled for like 2 hours, and I couldn't figure out how to fix it. And maybe that was me, but like it seemed like it was a hardware issue, and I wasn't a huge fan of that. 2, the carbon fiber-y bit. Like the outside of the laptop is unreal, but guys, I have super dry hands, and like you would not believe, and even so, I'm not a big fan of like the greasy marks that are left where my palms rest. It just doesn't look good. If you have sweaty hands, it's gonna be horrendous. But you might love the carbon fiber bit, and that's great. It's just not for me. 3, it can be a bit glitchy at times. Like the fingerprint reader is okay. The facial recognition is, like, it's pretty good. And it's great that it has those features, but they are a long way from perfect. Every time I plug the power in, it drops to black for a few seconds, and then it's back in the game. It's glitching all over the place. There's quite a few other glitchy issues that I've had, but like honestly, that might be a more Windows specific thing and me being a total noob than a Dell issue. So I want to cut them some slack. That might be me and not them. We'll talk about this more when I do a Windows versus Mac comparison, but it's a problem. 4, noisy fans. When the laptop is on a desk, it does a really good job of concealing some of the noise from the fans. So well done, Dell. But when the laptop is on, you know, your lap like it's supposed to be, it's ridiculously distracting. Maybe I'm asking for too much, but this wasn't an issue with my Mac when I was running exactly the same applications, doing exactly the same thing, and that was 5 years old. Okay, number 5, the webcam and the microphone are pretty poor. Like, I actually started off really wanting to like this webcam, and I've spent a week on Zoom calls and various other video calls, and the more I use it, the less I think of it. The microphone is shocking. The webcam is significantly worse than a 5-year-old MacBook, which is like, it's not good. Come on, guys. This is a premium laptop, and it should be better than this. Like, there are workarounds, of course, but like out of the box, you kind of expect more than that. Like in 2020, especially right now, this isn't good. And at least it's not at the bottom of the screen like it used to be, but it's not good. Having said all of that, on balance, this really is a killer laptop. Like, I'm still figuring out how to use Windows yet. And there are things I'm not sure about yet, I'm still figuring out. But the more I look at my Dell XPS 15 next to my MacBook, it just feels right. Like, it performs fantastically, it looks stunning, and costs far less than an equivalent MacBook, which is a big deal. If you're considering getting one of these guys, I cannot recommend it enough. But here's the question. What do you think about the 2020 Dell XPS 15? If you have any thoughts or questions, why don't you let me know below, and I'll make sure to answer every single comment to the best of my ability. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Happy laptop hunting.